of the COSO framework, Committee of Sponsoring Organizations. For those that may not know, that's going through an update process for a number of the changes that you've heard about, environmental changes and other changes focused on enhanced risk assessment and so forth, that's led to some of the major failures that have taken place over the last few years. Looking back and analyzing whether internal controls should have or could have or would have been able to catch some of those if there had been sort of changes or tweaks to the internal control framework model. So those who are looking to comment on exposure drafts, that'll be coming out in mid-November. So I'd ask each of you that I think has a vested interest in something like this to consider sending in comments. The only reason I bring that up is when we talk about continuous auditing or continuous monitoring, the aspect of monitoring is a critical component of the COSO framework. So if you're going to walk down that path and you're going to talk about monitoring, then you need to have the vision that Bill set forth. It starts with having the standards that Amy and her talented panel just went through. And now it's going to lead to having various applications that's going to enable either the external auditor, the internal auditor, or management to be able to conduct effective monitoring so that that aspect of the framework can be achieved. You also have apps, which we're going to talk about, which can help in terms of testing control activities. So you can take it out of the monitoring component, bring it into control activities, so that now maybe you don't have to sample. You know, when you sit back and think about under sampling theory, I'm going to test 50 transactions when I have 50 million transactions, and the theory behind sampling says, well, maybe that's effective so that you can get a sense of the entire population. So I think we can come up with more effective means of testing and getting comfortable with internal controls and with substantive testing if we can come up with the right applications. One of the things we as a panel are going to talk about is how do we get to that point? Is it a push to the practices, to the companies, to internal audit groups, and to management based on what we perceive as a need? Or is it a pull? Is it internal audit? Is it Brad and his group saying, wait a minute, we need applications going to help us do our job better? So to answer perhaps some of those questions and some other things, we have a panel here that's going to talk about apps, and particularly what ASEC is doing at this point. So with that, we'll go through and introduce brief introductions. I'll ask each panel member to briefly introduce themselves, and we're going to go this way, and we're going to come back to Jamie, who's going to talk about the specific app that you've heard about over the last through Bill's presentation and the last panel, and go through that and hopefully open that up to an interesting round of questions. So with that, Annie?
Hi, I'm Angie Coffin, and I work for Siemens Industry. I've been in the IT world space. I'm the unusual one here. I'm not an auditor, but my role is I oversee all the audits that travel through the IT world. Basically, I work with the auditors, the business, IT, and make sure that we get the data to the auditors and the quality that they're expecting. I have to say, I listened to everything, and Brad particularly, he hit on it, and about the timing of the requests. Well, in my world, we have requests that continually happen, all the time. It never stops, because if I'm not getting data for a specific IT audit, I'm getting one for a financial audit. And so I have a case where I have many audits to just keep overlaying, and the demands upon the people, 40, 50, sometimes 80 IT people, constantly having to pull data or organize the data in a format. The demands there become so grueling that the experience we have is that the data quality starts diminishing. And that's only because of resource demand. They're looking at the IT, they're looking at the audit and the auditors, I hate to say, as the bad people out there that are going to point fingers at them, and that they're trying to do the day-to-day important stuff, and this audit stuff, it just needs to go away. So having in that world, in that space, it's a continual demand upon them, and talking about where this is going to drive. You get the management buy-in, and I say management, I say IT management buy-in is going to be critical, because anything that comes back to them to have to support, it's going to be more demand on them, and they're going to say no, unless they can see a real value to it. And I don't know if did you want me to talk about that at this point, or
No,
do you want to circle around?
We'll circle back.
Okay, then I'll pass it over.
Thanks, Annie.
You're welcome.
I'm Kevin Moffett. I'm a newly minted PhD. I was at the University of Arizona. I have a strong systems background. Let me say now that I'm at Rutgers as an assistant professor. So my research has driven most of my experience, and it's in the fields of I've done a lot of fraud detection, doing text mining of the annual reports, specifically the MD&A section, and we've been trying to compare the language found in fraudulent annual reports and the language found in supposed non-fraudulent annual reports. And it's a very promising field. I've looked at several domains, and each is very different from just regular FBI interviews about terrible things that I won't even bring up, to the very and in those cases the interviews are very unstructured. There's no preparation for the questions that are being asked. And now we've been looking at the MD&A, where there's lawyers are poring over every word that's written down and trying to find if there's differences in fraudulent and non-fraudulent firms. And it's a tough problem, but I feel from what we found in other domains, we're going to find some key indicators that will help us determine whether a company is possibly engaged in something that they're not supposed to be doing, and then trying to keep that information from the companies on how they can alter their language in the future to not give out the cues is a different problem. But it's a circle. So go ahead.
Hi, I'm Bob Cuthbertson. I'm the Chief Operating Officer of Caseware Idea. We're one of the main vendors of one of those immature audit tools that were mentioned. Not my word. I guess in our experience in the market, we found a number of barriers to the use of tools that do audit analytics. Primarily data access, as was the subject of the previous panel. And then the next puzzling thing is, well, now that I have it, what do I do with it? Which I think can be dealt with by linking back to assertions, hopefully, of these apps. And then the third one, and I'm not sure that the Audit of the Future project is dealing with this, is the pathological fear of partners that their staff will do too much and find things that then they'll have to explain to somebody else. I have some slides about apps in general, but I also have, as Miklos knows, I had a foot in a couple of other camps. With Trevor Stewart, I worked on another data standards project for the OECD called the Standard Audit File Tax. It's now up and running in Portugal and nowhere else. And prior to that, I worked on XBRL-GL, and still waiting for the XBRL-GL files, although our software supports XBRL-GL. So I hope the data standards people have learned some lessons from some of the other efforts that have gone on in the past.
I'm Miklos Vassarelli, as you realize, and today my name is Eckert Kriel.
Your accent is funny.
Yeah, I have a funny accent, but he's South African, so he has a strange accent too.
So unlike Tom, your identity has changed this afternoon.
But actually, I wanted Eckert in the panel to basically give a data analytic view on apps. But Eckert has visa problems that can come into the United States, so we're desolate not having him here. He's probably watching it. Hi, Eckert. But now I kind of realize, considering the rest of the people in the panel, that that view will be expressed by someone else. So I'll be reasonably quiet, if that's possible.
So that leaves me. So I'm Jamie Basilico. I'm a global technology strategist, so I'm the technology person in the room, so I'm not an auditor. I work for Microsoft, but I'm full-time on Ernst & Young as the technology strategist. So I've been working for, I don't know, the last couple of months with Bill at Ernst & Young with the AICPA, helping to kind of put a technology stint or slant on what we can bring to the table as far as the data standards, the storage of the data itself, and then ultimately into the BI apps, and that's what we're going to talk about here. So I've been listening around to some of the comments in the room. Certainly, yes, there's, your application or an application that gets built is only as good as what you know about it. So these applications will certainly evolve over time. That goes without saying. What I'm going to show you here today is just a glimpse of what's possible, and there certainly are some things that are already on the market. There's some things that your company might have already built internally, but the intent here, and the slide I have up is, you heard Bill actually talk about the vision, you heard about the data standards, but the intent is that we'll start out with some data from one or many ERP systems, whatever that data may reside, how you get it, that's up for the data standards side. But that data has to then be stored in some kind of format, some fashion, be it either in the cloud, on-premise. Is it a database? Is it a relational store? Is it a multidimensional cube? Let's put that behind us. What's important, though, is what you do with that data once it's actually put in some representative form. So what we've done, actually myself and a couple of peers at Microsoft over the last couple of days, and I know, Bill, one of your comments I heard you say before was the hardest part that we had was actually understanding the data that we had at hand. And really the presentations or the front ends that you're going to see were really developed in literally maybe about 2 days worth of time. So once you have the data, and that's the biggest part of this, and the first block, really the audit data format, once you have that information at hand, it's very easy then to build applications, in this case a business intelligence application against the accounts receivable data. So I just want to put that in perspective or some context first before I jump into this. And I'm using the Wi-Fi connection. I'm fingers crossed that things are still connected because I'm connected back into our servers back in New York. So it looks all right. So again, the intention here is that I don't want to get too deep down into what tools are we using or so much on the data. I do know enough about what's in here, but again, I'll preface with the point that I'm not an auditor. So if you start throwing some detailed questions at me, I'm probably going to get lost real quick. But what I wanted to kind of focus in is this might be something that one of the auditors might be using out in the field, grabbing this data and then start to use it. And I know there was a question about snapshots. How quick is this information? Can it be used? Well, the one point that I wanted to mention here, continuous audit, continuous data feed. So this could actually be real-time data, depending upon what your definition of real-time is. This could be nightly, could be hourly. These reports or these views onto this information can change as often as that data feed comes in from your sources. So what we have here, just a couple of different visualizations. Again, I'm not going to go too deep on each one of these. I can spend literally an hour just on going through what we've built. But I want to try to do that in about 5 minutes, so hold on to your seats. So some real quick visualizations on the data. And again, we're looking at all things in or some portions of the GL, looking at net sales, the gross margin capabilities, or gross margin data, as well as cost of goods or cost of sales. So we can spot or highlight some pieces here. And again, this is going to be dependent upon what you wanted to actually highlight in the data. So we could look at trends in gross sales, and if I see some yellow or some red highlights, I might want to drill down deeper into that information to find out. So real quick, some high-level key metrics, KPIs, or key performance indicators, with some key indications of where I might want to drill into it. I could also have a deeper look at the balance sheets, and I mentioned that I'm going to kind of go into receivables here. So I'm looking at my cash, I'm looking at my receivables. I can look into some of this data, maybe the since I've been waiting for that long intro, my timeout. Let me do that again. So I can drill into 2007. So I have these slicers right away, and I don't know if you were looking very quickly, but or looked at what was changing, but my numbers are actually changing. So me as an auditor, I can go in and start to slice this data to give me some more information about what's here. So that's just one example where I have some predefined view and I could step into it. I might also have this pie chart, which is looking at my accounts receivable, different components of it, maybe sales, open balances, adjustments, manual pieces that are coming in. So I could actually drill down on this data. So again, don't worry so much about what's in the background, but I have all this data already totaled up, summarized, ready for me to use. I could drill into customers or customer groupings. So now I get to see my AR by my customer groups. I should actually drill into this a little bit more. Pie charts may not be the best thing, so maybe I'll flip this over into a different graph representation. I could actually then take this into a pivot table or a table representation of it, and I could drill into the years that are related to this data that I have. So I'm focusing on 2007. I could filter out my columns that are not here. So what I'm really getting at is that I'm an auditor. I could start to drill into this data, start to look for patterns, and again, I'm looking at just accounts receivable. So here's one stepping point, and I'm going through a series of different ways of looking at data. Now, let's say I'm looking at some of my accounts receivable data here, and I notice maybe for Q3 I see some large cash receipts in this, and I could drill down a little bit more. What I already have, and this is kind of like someone who's baking a cake, started doing the ingredients, now I have the cake. Let me show you it. So I have a report already up. So we're going to look at roll forward. So what I just did is basically there's a series of reports. To roll forward, I have roll off and aging already pre-built. So this is looking at that same data. So now what I really want to look at is I want to see whether or not there's been some high level of manual adjustments or some write-offs that are happening in a period. So again, if you look at this, I have my opening AR balance, what happened during the year. So I'm looking at previous balance from 2006, going through what happened during the 2007 year. And again, this is all live data, so I can change, again, timeout. That's a good thing, because if I didn't have security, it wouldn't allow me back in. So timeouts are good here. But what I want to show you is I could actually drill down into different dates or different years that I want to look at my receivables from my beginning to ending period, what happened during the year. Now, this is again just showing roll forward what's actually happening for the data that I have. Now, where do most auditors actually end up once they collect data? Usually back in Excel. So as someone who's actually using this, I can go down and say, open this up in Excel for me. I'm at a portal page right now, if it makes any difference. So I'm going to take those connections that I have and bring it down into Excel. Sorry for the small formatting. I wanted to make everything kind of fit on a page. So let me kind of drill in a little bit. So first thing, I want to enable editing. Remember what I mentioned about real-time connections into this data. So this Excel, there's no data that lives in this Excel spreadsheet. I'm connecting back in to those data structures that got brought over or populated through that data feed. So I'm in the Excel spreadsheet. Again, that same look and feel from what was up on the web. But what I can do here is I can, again, filter. Let's say if I wanted to filter or kind of zero in on certain years or certain months, and again, I'm looking at 2007, I can sub-select some of that, so I can zero in on certain times. But let me go back to the point I was making about some data and maybe something that might look awry. So I'm looking at October. October had a fairly large, sorry for moving around. Sales amount is the sales that were made during that time period, cash collections, what was actually brought in, returns, write-offs, and then I have my running AR. I don't know if you can, I forgot to mention this, but if you look on the right-hand side, this is my panel of available field items. So me as an analyst, I can go in, an auditor, I can say, well, maybe I don't want just that measure. I want to maybe bring in a different measure. I want to drill by a different set of data or criterias. I can actually bring that in. So if I said I wanted to look at customer hierarchy and maybe filter by that hierarchy, I've just brought that in, and I can now filter this and say, well, show me just those that are designated as a large organization or a small organization, and that will change my data in my table. And again, my resulting graphs could change too. So one thing that the auditor then might do is want to look deeper into this. And again, this is just an example to kind of put some things in the frame of mind of what you can do. So I might want to look deeper at my October sales. So I can right-click and drill into a deeper level. Think of it going down to the subledger. Let me pull up all those things that related to those invoices. So right within Excel, I can actually get to the detail level transactions and pull those up and start to analyze that. Another way that I can get to that deeper level transaction, I'm going to jump out again. Here's another cake that I put or built on the side. I have a report. Notice I already kind of put this up. This is a more detail level report that I can get to other than just pulling it up within Excel. So this is a sales report that I can use for invoices. I told it to go look at a calendar year and then pick up a certain month. These are all filters. Again, you would build your report, or whoever's building these reports, whether it's internal or it's a third party that builds these audit applications, or in this case the BI one. Those would be the things that are out there. So I can drill into this data. I could look for potentially patterns. I'm looking for maybe things where there might have been a write-off or an invoice came in. I could look for those elements then within the report structures that are out there. So again, just trying to build an idea of what can be done with this data. I do have one other piece for you, and that is a runoff analysis. So now I'm looking at this, and an auditor might want to say, well, all right, I know I had an invoice that happened within December of 2006. Let me look at the cash collections that came in against that particular set of invoices or invoice. Let me see if there's any large manual adjustments or where returns. And I look at this runoff graph right now, and I notice, yes, I have a lot of collections coming in January. That starts to tail off as we go through the year, but I'm getting a lot of returns. Normally we wouldn't want to see this in a runoff. Typically those returns or adjustments should happen close to the period when that invoice was brought in. So this might be a point now where an auditor comes in and says, well, why did I have such large returns coming later in the year? That might be an area for investigation, and then I could use the tools that are built within to start to pull up maybe those invoices or the collections at this level to try to put in some further analysis against that. So again, I could go into some other aging type details, but hopefully I think I did that in about 5 minutes or so. That's an example of an application or set of reports or analytics that can be built on top of the data that comes across from the data standards.
Good. Thanks, Jamie. I know you probably have some questions, but what I would like to ask maybe Bob, he's got also an example of an app, some screenshots for sort of compare contrast to the business intelligence application that Jamie just went through. Let's go through that, and then I think we'll start drilling down into some questions in terms of, you know, what this means, what are some pros and cons of this type of thing, how is it really going to help?
I know, I'm just kidding. That is pretty impressive. That was nice.
There we go.
You did that in 2 minutes.
Well, my world is laser pointer from Arent. Unfortunately, it doesn't work on 2 screens. Can we something better than that? I'll try this. Okay, the other thing I didn't mention when I was introducing myself is I spent 10 years running all the commercial activities at the Canadian Institute of Chartered Accountants. So some viewpoints on the role of the CPA. That's one of the questions that Chuck's going to be in here. We heard talk about audit apps. You want apps? We got apps. For the last 5 years have been selling a series of apps. These ones I'm going to talk about in what we call Idea Smart Analyzer Financial. There's about 50 tests that are primarily used by financial auditors for journal entries and all the major balance sheet items. How does it work? It's remarkably easy. the first and third steps will not be necessary if there is acceptance of this data standard, which is fabulous news for us, because I can take all of the developers that are building imports and put them onto more value-added. However, right now we import the data file. You pick the test you want to run. You tag the data because you do not know the contents of the data when you import it. You need to match that up in order for the standard test to run. You run the test. You follow the work, which I think followed along with one of the other slides we were talking about today, the human part of it. So, I don't know, you probably can't see this, but so we're importing the data file. Basically, I picked an Excel file because it's easy to import. We import a whole bunch of other things. We said we used to import XBRL GL files, but we don't get any, so we don't do that anymore. In Portugal, we import the standard audit file tax. And so that brings the file into IDEA, which looks sort of Excel-like in terms of columns and rows. From the Analysis tab, we picked the Smart Analyzer little button there, which brings up the tests. So for these tests, these are the tests that, of course, I couldn't figure out how to do the screen capture with the whole scroll bar down. So these are some of the tests that we can run on journal entries. You can pick and choose these. As you can see in this column, it says the data tag. No, we haven't done anything about that yet. And in some of them, there is input required or optional. It may be a date range or something like that would be necessary for, say, in the rounded amounts. You might want to say everything over that's got 5 zeros in it. So we tag the data by clicking on the tag data file or button, and we make it as smart as we can. For instance, for amounts, we only show you numeric fields that came from the file you imported. For dates, we only show you date fields. So we make it as easy as possible for the auditor to tag it. Or we do it the easy way, which is if somebody did it before you and saved them, you can reload them, and miraculously, they're all tagged. So that was the easy way to tag the data. And then you run the test. This is really the hard part. And then this is the result. This window down here is called erroneously the conclusions window. It really means this is all the work you have to do window. And the file that's shown up here is the journal entries with rounded amounts. So you can see in this column here, we had chosen amounts with 3 zeros in them. And so each one of the tests creates a different file. It also appears down here. You can drill down where it says View and choose to follow or not follow as your professional judgment sees fit. Who uses it? One of the big three or big four uses it extensively. The others use it mostly for tax compliance work. The next two. And most of the, not most, many of the top 100 security firms use the software already. We have 14,000 German tax auditors as well. In Germany, they took a different stance on data standards. Instead of telling you exactly how you had to present the data, they just told you had to present all the data that was tax relevant. You had to figure that out. And so we've worked with our colleagues in Germany to build a model of data as you could present it, and most of the small and medium-sized firms in Germany use our data standard, and as does the German Ministry of Finance. We have sold some to internal auditors, although we never intended to, and we've sold them to Oddball. I was just running through a list of clients this morning. People like the Palm Beach Sheriff's Office. Who knows? So what's next? Well, this is where we kind of butt heads with what the AICPA is thinking about. We already have one module on the market for SAP. We have others in the works that prepare the data for the auditor based on the test the auditor selects. So the auditor says, I want to run these 6 journal entry tests, I want to run these sales and these purchasing tests, and in the background the software goes in and makes the queries and runs it and puts it back into the software to do the test. We're obviously working on verticals, doing tests for different industries. We're improving the automation of this, of the import of the data, and the running of the tests can be scheduled and the results followed up continuously or periodically. We have a prototype app store, and we'll be integrating the tests with commonly used work and paper software and electronic audit programs that hopefully will give us a framework for fit in terms of the audit model. Not more, find it.
Okay, good. Thanks, Bob. Bob, while you're up, maybe you can talk a little bit about what's an appropriate architecture in terms of like building an app, right? I mean, you obviously have had experience with that. So, but what seems to be successful? Yeah. Okay.
That's the one we like. Well, I think here's the toughest part about building an app, especially when we're dealing with these are just transactions. Like what Jamie was showing is more aggregated data. This is just transaction files, and the toughest part is the logic. If you describe the logic, and this is where I think the assurance standards people can provide some really good input, is just say, okay, to meet these audit assertions, you should be doing these kinds of tests, and here's the logic of it. And then you let the professional software vendors make the code or whatever else they make. But the logic is the tough part, and that's where the audit domain expertise comes in.
Okay, good. Thanks. Maybe we'll pause right here in terms of looking at a couple of apps. If anybody has any questions, Trevor.
Yeah, Chuck, I guess I'm not quite sure where all this fits into the sort of ASEC sort of apps library idea. I mean, is the idea that these would be built according to some standard or operate with the standard audit file? Would these be apps made available by the AICPA? I mean, I look at Bob's stuff, caseware stuff. I mean, that's proprietary stuff, right? And then I look
Cheap though.
Is the idea that would be an AICPA provide? I'm a bit lost as to where all this fits into the ASEC program.
Yeah, let me see if I can sort of clarify that a little bit. I think the idea behind this is that ASEC wanted to develop the standards as the first step. You saw the move to the future. That was the first step. I think it's fair to say, and Amy will correct me if I'm wrong, that AICPA doesn't want to be in the software development business, right? It has no intention of that. But they do want to be in the facilitation business for the purpose of practitioners, and that they can use audit apps. But I think taking it to the next step to what Jamie has done is sort of proof of concept around the data standards that effort is producing. So once you get the proof of concept and then can show it can work, then maybe it takes on significance with other vendors that may then glom onto that for purposes of providing products that hopefully companies may need.
Yeah, and if I add to that, if you think about what's out there, think of it as a blueprint. To say, all right, here's the blueprint for what the data should look like. Here's the blueprint for what a storage mechanism should look like, and then it's up for individuals or independent software vendors to come up with saying, all right, I'm going to take advantage of that standardized model so I can then build an application. The key part there is that one of the key elements is that set of applications could be an open source model. So it could be for profit, or it can just be, here's an application based about, here's an application since I know what the GL looks like, based upon the model that has been defined, I can now build a set of applications. Now, I could share that with a bunch of auditors or different clients that want it. The key part, though, is that that's a first step, and I kind of equate it as a Lego set of building blocks. Well, that might be one element. Now, someone could then take that and commercialize that one application. Someone could augment that and make it another part of that open source community to actually use. The intent is, like you said, is it's not to have the AICPA be a software house, but just be the conduit for people to build those applications, those Lego blocks, be it either commercialized or not.
So the open source model is the kind of thing that you're thinking of in terms of laying down the standards and then having people build to those, and they don't have to worry about how the data is organized underneath.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, the open source is certainly one. I mean, when you get into commercialized software, that's where you get further thought, further logic put in, support behind it. But it's at least laying the groundwork for being able to those widgets to be built.
Hey, Chuck, maybe I could just add a question. One of the things that I think we're hopeful, whether it happens or not, is that yes, we're hopeful that the assertions will better articulate with the apps, and I think that's what you're saying, Bob. We need to link those two apps. One of the things that we hope that the ASCA or CPA throughout practice will do is to help lift those up. That'd be one element. Another element is get a little quick feedback on what you think this is. Did it meet your expectations? You know, trying to do some test that would satisfy certain assertions. Did it do it? And then rate them, if you will. And so I've got that's the open source element of it, if you will, where I've got a lot of people that are out there instantly giving you feedback, saying, hey, it would have been cool if this did this, and you're going to take that feedback and you say, no, that's right, it's a good thing we can do that, and then let it evolve. Or perhaps someone else's app will come out as a strong one, and maybe that will evolve. I don't know. We're just trying to put an environment together that would facilitate, I think, a stronger use of technology and pushing it further than where it's been in the past. And where that goes is in the yes.
And facilitate the dialogue with the auditors that Bob mentioned to make it relevant. That's where we can come in and add value. We really want the apps to be developed because they help other people understand why this standard is relevant. If you can't show them, they don't understand the value of the standard. So.
Yeah.
I love those applications that Jamie just showed. I think, about 20 years ago, there was this big rise from C-level people saying, I need an executive dashboard. Remember that? It was like years ago.
Yep.
Okay. This is the first example I've seen where you can actually make an effective dashboard of looking at accounts receivable, cash. I mean, if you can tweak it a little to get it on a daily basis and compare it year to year so you can look at seasonality, this would be a great process to go to the C-level people and say, look at what we can, do by doing, constant monitoring, constant, continuous auditing, and help you manage your company, manage everything from accounts receivable, accounts payable, cash, the whole works. Because if you can get that kind of granularity, I don't know how difficult it is for you to do something, build something where instead of bar charts, line charts. And again, that helps build a little confidence in saying, are we going in the right direction? Because I think, from what I understand, most people want to know not so much where I am today,
Right.
but which direction am I going?
Where have you come from and where you're going in the future?
The trends.
Yep.
And that's what the executive dashboard was supposed to bring to our environment. And I don't know, has anyone seen one?
Some companies have in certain forms and formats. I wanted to get back, though, to a point you raised earlier in the previous panel. It says, why aren't audit committees extremely nervous about this and just buying this or forcing management to implement this type of plan? It's because they haven't had a major failure yet, for one thing, and they're getting representations by management that their internal controls are in really good shape and strong, effective, and functioning in the company. And perhaps they don't need it, or else they already have an effective program that would otherwise identify a potential major failure that could be in the offing. Right or wrong?
Your brother, Lehman Brothers,
Yeah.
WorldCom, that's not enough?
Right. We're a well-controlled company until the failure occurs. That's sort of the attitude, right? And then all of a sudden they see the light, and they see the benefits of something like this. What I saw in these applications is it's very effective risk management. You can look to see where your potential risk areas are and focus your audit effort, whether it's internal audit, management's testing, or the external audit, into those areas that could legitimately lead to an audit failure that's going to damage your brand in the marketplace. That's what I see the power of these apps, because you're not going to take the people. I know from an external audit standpoint, you can't take the people out of the equation because there's a lot of data up there. Somebody's got to look at it and analyze it, right? But it's where you look. It's what information you pull together to help you do that in a very effective process is where I think some of these apps are really going to play. I saw a question over here.
Yeah, just a question maybe computer science has now moved to certified software. Can you prove, for instance, when you put up a graph from your software that you did not miss any transactions that were in there?
Well, therein lies a potential issue with doing an audit.
Well, no.
External audit.
No,
But-
no, it's not an audit, it's the software itself.
But I understand.
You have to certify the software itself. And that's one of the questions that I've always been leery about open source, because I have done it. I have made an open source spreadsheet, print a total at the bottom that did not add up to what was in the column. And I can do that. If you would do that, and unless we have techniques to certify software, I can essentially prove anything I want. Because the data doesn't happen. The data is irrelevant. I can make it do it.
Yeah.
So we need the SCBA involved means that we're going to have some independent people certifying these documents. These are no longer just showing which store has a bottle of wine. This is someone creating a fictitious journal entry.
Yeah, and that's going to lead us into the next question I was going to ask Annie. We'll take one more question, but you've teed up sort of the next topic we're going to talk about.
And
Yeah.
that's the validation of the software.
Yes.
The same thing as an audit is. Audit is a validation.
Right.
Are we doing the things that allow us to effectively run our business and are keeping ourselves out of trouble? We're going to stay in business because we're doing the right things, and we are. And the attempt to have an audit is to manage that so that you are successful and you don't run yourself out of business because you've missed something. And that's why you do the sample and all that, so you
Yep.
catch these things
Exactly.
that are there, that if you didn't do the random type sampling, you might have missed it. And the same thing with validating the software. There's a process you go through to validate the software that works effectively.
Okay, Annie, I guess that takes us to what do you see from your perspective and your experience as some of the pros and cons of using using audit apps?
Well, the pros, I'm really excited when I saw Jen. I mean, I just want to take you and bring you back with me to my company. I can let you go. Being audit ready is a slogan we have in our organization, and it's like we're continuous auditing, continuous monitoring, because we have a goal to be audit ready with 30 days or less. And I told you earlier that basically my responsibility is to gather data continually for one audit right after another. A lot of times it's repeating the same data. By having these tools, this enables us to release these resources that are sitting there pulling data, is tying up, and of course, like I said, the quality of the data keeps going down. This gives us the ability to be audit ready like that, if we need to be, because we're able to produce it immediately, or actually able to be doing it continuously. I would like to see in our organization is having this available not just to the auditors, but available to the IT people, because they're the ones that every auditors go to ask for information, but they should be able to be doing this and monitoring it and identifying where any weaknesses are, because of most of the time when a weakness is identified, you bring in the IT people to help fix it. The con here, or the negative that I see specifically with being open source, and IT, as Stephen touched on a little bit, there is having an open source application. You're allowing yourself to get into the customizing it for your organization. And in my organization, I can have AP process, but it can be varied, because I have 5-6 divisions, and then each division has a different department, and this one has this way that they want to do, and they'll vary the process enough that the app that is supposed to serve that function now has to be customized for their world, because they're not going to go and say, I'm not going to be like everybody else, I'm unique. I don't want to be like that division, I'm unique. And then you have, now you've got to audit the app, and you've got to keep track of change management and who has authorizations to do this, so that you've got another level. To me, that is the biggest con. I don't know, how to get around that. I don't think it's possible to do that. But definitely the biggest advantage is to having these types of tools or applications available for auditors and IT or the business to use, is that it is going to ultimately reduce a lot of the effort in preparing for an audit, or constantly and being aware of what you have, where your situation is and where you're going, such as what you brought up in the question.
I have a question. Isn't this the opportunity for like caseware or a vendor? I mean, you'd have to go through the SOC 1, 2, 3, process, but doesn't that add validity to the process if you can count on a vendor that has approval and software?
As long as it's not customizing the tool.
I just want to see. I want to see the look on the AICPA's lawyer when Amy takes that back and says, "Gee, we'd like to certify software."
And that is, if you have a standard repository where, depending on whether it's GL, AP, AR, you have a standard format, this is the data that we need to look at as part of our audit process, and that's the expected data that's put in the repository. Then the application looks at the same data, whether you get it from different locations, you have a central repository that it goes into, so it's always in the same format.
And that's the key.
Resolve that problem.
The standardized model, the standardized data is the part that makes you go forward with that application. And a comment about, Arent software vendors want to get into this. That's one of the reasons, besides me supporting Ernst & Young, Microsoft has Dynamics ERP. We're in constant conversations with our Dynamics team for the things that we're talking about here. How do they incorporate that then into the Dynamics ERP tool sets to enable better auditing, better reporting, those types of functions.
What kind of obstacles do you think you'll have with the software?
Getting the program, at least speaking myself internally for Microsoft, getting our program managers to see that there's enough need or warrant to build that into the tools, because it always comes back to cost, what it takes us to build versus what that's going to give to the market.
No, regarding the software validation of the apps or software verification, might be an idea to use different sources. That it's common in software analysis to use different source codes to do the same exercise and see if it's the same output as the result. You can compare to different vendors or open source. That's available.
I have a question.
I'm supposed to ask.
Yeah, well, as a sort of greenhorn in this area.
That's defined as a newly minted PhD.
There you go.
All right, well, then I've repeated myself. Will the audit apps be used for helping auditors do the drill down analysis like we saw Jamie do, or will they help actually giving recommendations and decision making? And if so, I mean, do you see any risks associated with that?
Yes, to your first question.
That was my same answer.
No, I see it both, actually, because as I alluded to earlier, when you looked at the data that was showing up on the screen, you couldn't just produce that, put it in your work papers and say, okay, fine, I'm done with my audit, right? I would not want to be in the position of defending those work papers if they were challenged by a regulator, an internal quality control process, or anything else. So I think we all understand that. But what it does do is it helps us focus on where are the areas that we do need to look at audit. If you see a really unusual trend, especially when you can immediately compare that to a prior year in a business that's generally seasonal, and all of a sudden you see a spike that's hard to explain, well, I think, somebody would want to look into that. And it may not be wrong, but it certainly is an area that you want to focus on. Right, so I could see that as used in terms of risk analysis, and I can also see it from the standpoint of the internal audit. If the internal auditors have good controls around using this type of software and good documentation about results and the follow-up efforts, it gets back to the point we talked about earlier. That's where the external auditor can utilize that work, perhaps not in its entirety, but certainly from the standpoint of utilizing management's controls and then designing the follow-on substantive test, perhaps less work, because of the strength of those controls once they're verified. So in that respect, it gives the ability of the external auditor to use the work of others in a very effective way when those controls are present. So I do see an efficiency aspect to this as well, in addition to a risk management consideration.
I just want to tell you a little story. I did a lot of work with Border Patrol while I was at Arizona, and they had a system there called ATS, the Auto Targeting System. And it was basically a tool for Border Patrol agents as cars were coming in from Mexico to automatically identify the cars that were carrying illegal immigrants or drugs or whatever. And it was based on this complicated expert system from feedback from Border Patrol agents, etc. And when it was initially rolled out, they had 90% of the automobiles that they targeted were, they were, true positives. They were, there was something wrong with them. Well, after a while, the countermeasures started popping up, and now it's only they learned what the drug lords or whoever learned how to beat the system, and now it's only at 20% accurate.
Okay.
So it was a great system to start. So I'm just thinking about this from if an external auditor has an app and there's a company that's trying to dupe the external auditor, eventually the app might lose its usefulness over time. So that's just a risk that take into account.
And it addresses the fact that this is a constantly changing environment. So you can't. There's no one solution that's going to last forever, right? It's just constantly refreshing itself.
Yeah, Kevin, I'd just like to add that's the situation with viruses and Trojans. With leapfrogging one over the other. What I like about Bob's solution there is that those look like finished products. You just click on them and they run. I use Power Pivot too, and I love it. But, Bob, you opened that up and said, okay, here's a development tool, and any auditor, idea user, we can put your app on our site or whatever, and people download it for $5, kind of like Apple's method. That would be good. That would be the best way to keep on top of what people are doing and building the control against the countermeasure, because, thousands of users could quickly react to changes in the market more quickly even than caseware could.
They don't have to worry about quality control and stuff like that.
Well, it's not just Apple or Google, when they put stuff in their app store and you check it out, you'd have to do that at least. I don't know that you'd be able to check it all the way back to the source data, the way we're envisioning, but at least you can make sure that it works.
Yeah, when we're talking about the prototype app store, that's exactly the issue we get to is does this do what it says it does, and will it harm your computer?
Exactly. Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Moffat, didn't you say that you're doing some research and looking at the wording in like campaigns or whatever, and obviously if there were certain words that were used that would be your key to determining if something is fraudulent, but if they change those words, does it make their statement now less fraudulent?
That's one possibility. Right. Yeah. Well,
somebody changed the word.
I believe in a multimodal approach, and different from the practitioners out here. As a researcher, I get the chance to look at unconventional sources of data. So, text is a new area. There's research done with interviews and the vocalics. So, that's a harder. It's hard to change your voice to sound more honest or less deceptive. So, I've got my fingers in a few different areas, but text is a major one. You can. That's the thing with text. It's important sometimes to make sure your data comes from sort of off the cuff, responses. Like I was saying before, if you're spending weeks and months preparing a transcript, then you can prepare all your countermeasures, but it's harder to do on the fly.
Well, is it a lot harder when we're looking at the GL or most of these apps are working on unified data description for GL information, and changing numbers is significantly more difficult than talking about that. The inferences for text is not, numbers are numbers.
Yeah, well, and I'm not saying you're going to develop, rock solid, hardcore evidence based on, transcripts, but if it can help lead you in the right direction, then, go for it.
Oh, one more question.
Well, if Kevin can tell a story, then I can tell.
You only have 2 minutes.
But that privilege does not extend to your peers, I will say that. Okay.
It kind of gets back to what Graham was saying and some other people were saying. I remember there was a story, maybe it's an urban myth, I don't know, but there was a manager who wanted weekly financial statements of the company. He said, this is back in the old legacy mainframe days. Well, because it was a batch-oriented system, you really couldn't produce weekly financial statements. So there was a person whose job it was to create fake weekly financial statements. So the boss was satisfied that everything was okay. And then the only reason they discovered it was this guy went on vacation. There was nobody on Monday to make the new fake financial statements. So, in a sense, it puts more pressure on you guys, like Jamie's model and stuff, that you got to make sure that this thing is like absolutely bulletproof because, there's other research that shows, and again, this is old research, but you can put random numbers on green bar paper, the old computer paper, and people had more confidence in that than anything else, just because it came out of a computer, it must be correct. So there's going to be a lot of pressure to make sure that this app is bulletproof on the back end, the front end, the side end, and every other end.
Yeah, quite typically in things that I showed up there in terms of that analysis, there's checkpoints or audit steps in each one of those. Do I have the right amount of data? Did the right sources come over? The data that did get put into that structure when it was transformed, did it meet the right level of steps that were required to put it into that format step? And then you also do comparisons of that data versus the data that was coming in as it landed in your database. So I totally agree. Those checks have to be there. Otherwise, you can't really be confident on what you're looking at from the presentation layer.
All right, well, I want to thank you all for your questions. I think it was a good discussion. Certainly want to thank the panelists.
Thank you.